Misplaced faith in medieval chronicles from the book Some Blunders of Indian Historical Research by Mr. P. N. Oak. Another blunder of the Indian historical research has been the misplaced faith that has been put in the medieval chronicles. These chronicles are mostly flatteries with very little grain of truth. The chroniclers were mainly interested in the court and the military aristocracy. Some of them deliberately sought the patronage of the ruling sultan and the principal nobles. The history of the medieval India has been so far chiefly compiled from the works of Muslim historians who represent the Rajput princes in a very unfavorable light, calling them infidel dogs, headstrong rebels, etc. Bearing such unfriendly feeling, the Mohammedan historians never do full justice to the important role which Rajput princes played in the imperial campaigns. One was that they wrote their chronicles not out of literary urge to leave the truthful accounts of contemporary happenings for posterity, but for pure axe-grinding. Their other drawback was that they wrote with the bias and animus against the local culture, people, religion, which militated against the impartiality, veracity and detachment which the true historian must possess and exhibit. Thus, for instance, works on Jahangir or Akbar always aver in the prefaces that our main source of history of the rule of Jahangir or Akbar is Jahangir Nama or Akbar Nama. Here I wish to point out that these memoirs purporting to have been written by the rulers themselves, like Jahangir Nama by Jahangir, or so-called accounts of the reigns written at the instance of the rulers by their underlings, like Badshah Nama, an account of the reign of Shah Jahan by Mullah Abdul Hamid, are gross prevarications, because their primary object was to project a false image of the sovereign, exaggerate crown wealth out of all proportions, and gloss over the ruler's misdeeds. I shall present before you a panoramic survey of all important Muslim chronicles and the much quoted records left by them, to show why discerning historians have repeatedly pointed out the utter unreliability of these men and their works, and how, in spite of those caveats, the apple cart of the Indian medieval history continues to move merrily through our schools, colleges and research institutes, unmindful of the false nature and insecure wheels. Let us take Al-Biruni. In his case, as in that of others, throughout medieval history, we are told that the accounts that Al-Biruni had left are only source of our knowledge of events that he has dealt with. But this is fallacious. It's far from truth. Edward C. Satchor, the well-known scholar historian, writes, "Historic traditions failing us, we are reduced to a single source of information, the authors, when he wrote King Mahmud of Ghazni had been dead only a few weeks. As a cautious politician, he awaited the issue of the contest between the two heirs of Mahmud and Masood, and when Masood had been firmly established on the throne of his father, he at once hastened to dedicate to him the greatest work of his life, the Canon Masudicus. That it was not at all against the moral principles of Al-Baruni to write such dedications to the prince is shown by the two publications of his with dedications which exhibit customary Byzantiums of the time. He has conferred upon me a high distinction and placed me under obligation of everlasting gratitude. This is what Al-Baruni says. Now, when he is so much under obligation, how can he write true history? Then, in Dr. Sachua's words, our author during 13 years of his life, from 1017 to 1030, carried from his native country to the center of Mahmud's realms, did not officially inducement or did not enjoy the favors of the king and his leading men. He had no official inducement or encouragement, nor had any hope of royal reward. Incredibly, I would like to quote another little passage from Dr. Edward C. Sachu's preface, in which he observes, speaking about the construction of ghats at holy bathing place, Al-Baruni says, in this they, the Hindus, have attained a very high degree of art, so that our people, the Muslims, when they see them, wonder at them and are unable to construct anything like them. The Al-Baruni's assertion need to be examined with the utmost caution and discernment, because he wrote with an animus against the Indians, and that his praise and denunciation varied directly in proportion to the favors he received from the others. Secondly, he made it clear that the invaders who were dazed by the mere river ghats in India could hardly build anything worth the name themselves. And it is not difficult to understand that mastery of the building art presupposes intensive tuition, instructions, and preservation of study. These became impossible in India during 1000 years of Muslim invasions, both from Muslims and Hindus. Thirdly, we can deduce from Al-Baruni's statement that the invaders destroyed all that was good and beautiful, not only in India and Iran, but also wherever they went. Fourthly, what Al-Baruni ascribes to Mahmud Ghazni, namely the reduction of the Hindu to particles of dust and the scattering them away, continued at least till the end of the Aurangzeb's rule, and lessened thereafter only because decadence of Muslim power to a state of harmlessness. Since Muslim rule followed the Mahmud Ghazni pattern throughout, Ferdowsi's instance is clear refutation of the royal Muslim patronage and encouragement to the arts and letters. Whatever patronage was existed or extended was to sycophants and to the vulgar kind of dance and music accompanied drinking orgies. Coming to Abul Fazl, we find that all the discerning Europeans, historians, brand him as the doyen of flatterers. Abul Fazl has far too often been accused by European writers of flattery and even willful concealment of facts damaging to the reputation of his master. Abul Fazl succeeded remarkably in his attempt in bond-winking almost all historians and making them believe that the nondescript monarch like Akbar was one of the all-time greats in the history. We'll continue next time.